All right, well, good evening, everyone. We will give it a minute to let everyone join us. I think we've got a few people waiting to get in and watch the stream, and we will start here in just a second. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. This is Let's Talk LGBTQ, and today we're discussing how to be a better ally through both sexual orientation and gender identity education. This is a topic that I really hope will help you understand not only your friends in the LGBTQ space, but also see you reflecting on your own personal identity and understand yourself that much better when we're all done. So, before we get started, let me introduce Out Motorsports. We had this event sort of take off on Facebook, of all places. We had roughly 6,500 people respond to this event invite, and I'm guessing most of you don't know who we are. So, really glad to have you all here, but let's talk about who Out Motorsports is before we get started. So, we are a group that exists first and foremost to bring LGBTQ automotive enthusiasts together. The world of cars and motorsports is often perceived as this overwhelmingly conservative, white, cisgender, straight male space. I said perceived, it's not necessarily like that, but to someone who is not all of those things, it can really come across that way. So things are a little bit different in reality, but we're here to both connect folks and encourage them to show up in all these different automotive spaces, whether that's cars and coffee, autocross, track days, even internet discussion forums, or automotive related jobs. We want these people to show up as their authentic selves, whatever that looks like. So beyond just serving as that connection between LGBTQ automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, we're also providing a platform for people to share their automotive adventures on our website or right here on our YouTube channel. In the last couple of years, we've also added new car reviews to the mix. So we've been getting new cars to take a look at for about a week at a time, and we share those, again, both on the website and on YouTube. I will mention this session is free, but we would love your support, and that is also free. So please take a second. If you're not subscribed already, please do subscribe right here to the YouTube channel. I don't really know how this looks to all of you. It's my first time doing a live stream, but it's free to subscribe to YouTube, so please do that, and you can also give us a follow on Facebook and Instagram. If you do want to support a group financially, like I said, we're not here to take any of your money, at least not tonight, but there is a link in the description to the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is one of these really great groups that supports LGBTQ folks, and in particular, they provide crisis counseling and suicide prevention services for LGBTQ people under the age of 25. So something that is, very important to me. It's very important to a lot of my friends and my colleagues, and if you are looking to support anyone tonight from a financial, monetary perspective, please hit that link. It's in the description of the event. It's in the Facebook invite, so you can find that link and donate that way. Now, on to introducing myself. So, my name is Jake. I'm the co-founder of Out Motorsports, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I've been a car enthusiast since birth. Went to college, started autocrossing in 2007. I began doing track days in 2009, moved into time trials, which is a form of competition, in 2013, and then went full-on wheel-to-wheel racing at the amateur level in 2017. So racing is not my day job. I do it on the side with my own money and my own car, and not a lot of sponsorship or anything like that. I compete with the National Autosport Association, which has regions all over the country. So if you're looking to learn how to be a better driver, get into some sort of competition, there is something for everyone at all levels with just about any car. So definitely go check out the National Autosport Association. They are known as NASA, but not the space and rockets NASA. I will also mention that we took questions before the event started, but if something comes to mind, there is a link in the description here on YouTube and also in the event invite. You can head over, it's a Google form, it will be submitted anonymously, and at the end of this whole thing, I will cover as many questions as I have the energy to in a certain period of time. So, with all that, Trevor Project, Google form link, those are the two spaces you can go, and please subscribe right here. So, with all that, let's get into why we're doing this in the first place. So really, okay, so Taylor's just saying this looks like a regular video with a chat window. That's awesome. All right. So anybody, no matter how you identify, needs some allies in the world. You need some friends in the world. And, for those of us who identify as LGBTQ, we really appreciate all of the rest of you being those allies. But being an ally can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So by learning a little bit more today, we're hoping you can all understand yourself, understand everyone else, and ultimately empathize with others who are like you or not like you in all these different ways. You'll really end up more equipped to be a true advocate instead of just a more passive ally. So, to start, let's talk about the acronym, big acronym. So you'll see here, I've got a bunch of letters. This is total alphabet soup. We've got LGBTQIAP and plus. And depending on where it's used, you'll see the acronym spelled out with a lot of different letters to include a lot of different identities. Those can include lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, pansexual, and everything else which falls under that plus sign. Now that can be a lot, and a lot of times you'll see the acronym shortened a little bit because not everyone in the community agrees on what's necessary to include. So LGBT is likely the most common, followed by LGBTQ. You'll see the plus sign added in there sometimes. It's kind of an all-encompassing little thing you can add on. Q for queer is really this term that used to be considered more derogatory and kind of a slur, but in the past handful of years, it's really been reclaimed by the community to be this more all-encompassing term for just about anyone who falls under this big rainbow of identity. So, whatever you're looking to use as far as letters, you really can't go wrong. So whichever one you choose to use is fine. Don't get too hung up on getting this all 100% correct. There really is no one way to spell it, say it, or use it, but whatever you're saying is truly gonna be fine. So, before we dig in any further, because we're about to get into the meat of all this, it's important to note that everything we're about to discuss is on a sliding scale. If you think of a battery, think of your cell phone battery. This is just like how much a battery can be charged to a different percentage at any given moment. It can be 100%, it can be 0%, or it can be somewhere in the middle, and it can fluctuate a little bit. So when we're talking about all these different topics, you might feel 0% about something or 100% about something, or you might feel somewhere in the middle. And other people might feel more 30%, 50%, 80%, things like that. So just keep that in mind. Now with that, let's get into this. So the model that we're going to use is something called the gender bred person, and this is by someone named Sam Killerman. This is something that is made available for free under some sort of Creative Commons license, and I think it is a really, really great way to think about yourself and think about everyone that you know. So we're going to break down how you think about yourself. Don't worry about anyone else, just worry about you tonight. So we're going to think about 4 different things. We're going to think about your gender identity, gender expression, romantic and sexual attraction, and anatomical sex. So we will get into details on all of those, and I will share some examples that will probably make this a little more clear because it might be clear as mud right now. So we're going to start off with something that everyone should understand pretty easily, and that is anatomical sex. So this is the easy one. This is a label that's given to you at birth based on medical factors. The obvious medical factor here is your genitalia, but hormones and chromosomes, your DNA, are also included here. Most people, not all, most people are assigned male or female, and that's what's listed on your birth certificate. So when you see all these excited parents do a gender reveal and burn down all of California, what they're actually doing is revealing their child's genitals and nothing else. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But as with everything we talk about, like I said, nothing is totally binary. So some people are born with a variety of differences due to their DNA, including differences in genitalia, chromosomes, internal sex organs, hormone production, hormone response, and secondary sex traits. And there's many different terms that can be used to describe people born this way with different characteristics, but the most common term that you'll probably hear is intersexed. So most people will hear male or female, and then you have intersex, and there's different ways to break this up as well. Now, going off of anatomical sex, we're going to move to gender identity. These are things like what's inside, truly. It's your innermost concept of self. So if you haven't had to think about how your gender identity aligns with the sex that you were assigned at birth, and remember, assigned means the genitalia that you were born with, it's probably because you haven't had to think too much about it. So great, that's awesome for you. Some people have to think about it a little bit more. Now, it's important to note here that gender is also a construct. It is a societal, social construct. And it is something that we as a society have assigned to people based on the genitals that they're born with. We as humans love to put labels on everything. So it's important that we kind of deconstruct these a little bit. And this does really apply everywhere. Gender identity is all over the place as a construct. If you noticed here on the slide, I wrote the word male in pink and female in blue. I flipped them. We have come to expect these colors to actually be male as blue, female as pink, and that's just a social construct, and way, way long ago, they were actually flipped. So I just did it again here. So we started off talking about anatomical sex, and now we're talking about gender identity. When those two concepts align to you, and you're not really thinking about it a whole lot, you're considered cisgender, or you'll hear it referred to as cis, C-I-S. So if those two concepts align, you would call yourself cisgender. If the two concepts are not a match and your inner sense of self or soul doesn't match your physical genitalia, your physical body, your other physical characteristics, you would probably identify as transgender. And that's often written, spoken, identified, abbreviated as trans. So transgender is basically the idea of your body not matching who you actually are inside. And it's important to note as we talk about this, we'll talk about transgender folks throughout the evening here. Trans men are men and trans women are women. The cisgender and transgender commentary are just identifiers that don't have to be used every time you talk about yourself or someone else. It would be a lot if every time someone talked about me, they said Jake is a cisgender man. Usually people are just going to say, yeah, Jake's a guy, Jake's a man, whatever. So you have those identifiers. As with all these other identifiers, they're very helpful, but you don't have to use them 24/7. So with the concept of anatomical sex, gender identity, cisgender, transgender, let's dive into all that. And we're going to go with people who you probably know. So this should be easy. We all know these two. This is Brad Pitt and this is Jennifer Lopez. Brad Pitt is an actor and J-Lo is a pop music artist. Brad and Jennifer are both great examples of cisgender people. So their gender identity, which is that mental sense of correctness of who they are, aligns with their anatomical birth sex and the pronouns that people have used for them for their entire lives. So Brad would use he and him pronouns, Jennifer Lopez would use she and her. Now, moving on, we're going to talk about two other people. On the left is Laverne Cox. You might know her from Orange is the New Black, the TV series that was on Netflix. And if you are a Taylor Swift fan, she was also in the music video for You Need to Calm Down. On the right, if you're a comedy fan, this is Ian Harvey. He's a comic, an actor, and a writer who's primarily known for his stand-up comedy. And he was the opening act for Margaret Cho for several years. So both of these people are celebrities of a sort, so we all know them as Laverne and Ian. Laverne is a transgender woman, so her anatomical sex at birth didn't align with who she actually was and is. So somewhere along the line, she transitioned from male to female, and that just brought her body in line with who she's been since birth from day one internally. And Ian is in the same boat. He's a transgender man who did the same thing. He transitioned from female to male, again, to bring his body in line with who he actually is. So, with that, we'll move on to romantic and or sexual attraction. And we're going to use the terms romantic and sexual interchangeably here, but they both apply more or less. Romantic and sexual are obviously two different things, but they're kind of along the same lines. Now, these don't line up with gender identity. This is why we're having this conversation, because these are not the same thing. So whether you are cisgender or transgender, you may be romantically and sexually attracted to people of the same sex, the opposite sex, both distinct sexes, or any and all sexes along kind of a sliding scale. Or you may not really be attracted to anyone in a sexual manner at all, but still interested in some sort of romantic relationship. So you hear a lot of different terms. This is where a lot of the terms in that alphabet soup of acronym come in. And we'll start off with one that everyone probably understands, heterosexual. So you would also hear that identified as straight. And these are people who are These are people who are attracted to people who identify as the opposite sex. So if you are a man and you are straight or heterosexual, you are attracted to people who identify as women. The next term is gay. That is used when a man is attracted to other men. There's the term lesbian, which is a term used when a woman is attracted to other women. And you'll also sometimes hear lesbian women referred to as gay as kind of a more all-encompassing term. Gay is another great analog for just homosexual, which means attracted to the same sex. There's also bisexual, which is when you're attracted to people who identify as either male or female. And then there's pansexual, which is kind of an interesting term because this is sometimes used interchangeably with bisexual, but it takes the concept of any sexes and it kind of removes any pretense or label from the equation. For anyone who's watched Schitt's Creek, it was a great COVID show to binge. One of the early episodes, David is talking about his identity, and he says he's really more attracted to the wine and not the label. So pansexual is more that attracted to the wine, not the label sort of thing. And then finally, I mentioned some people are perhaps romantically attracted to folks, but not sexually attracted, and you would call those people asexual. So they just don't have a ton of or any sexual attraction toward other people. So again, we've got some examples because this all makes more sense when you talk about it in the term of people. So on the left, we've got Ellen DeGeneres. She's an actress and comic and host of The Ellen Show, which can be found wherever your mother watches her favorite TV. And on the right, we've got TJ Osborne, who is a country music singer from the Brothers Osborne. Now, Ellen identifies as a cisgender lesbian woman. So to break that down, the body that she was born into matches that of her internal mental identity, her internal sense of self, and she is also romantically and sexually attracted to other women. The same thing goes for TJ, who identifies as a cisgender gay man. So again, the body he was born into matches that of his internal sense of self, and he's romantically and sexually attracted to other men. Now, we're going to go back to Laverne and Ian here, because this is where I think some people get kind of hung up. So again, Laverne is a transgender woman. Laverne is a transgender straight woman. And I did a little bit of research on Laverne before we started this and found an interview, and she stated that she developed feelings for her male classmates at a young age. So pre-transition, remember she transitioned from male to female, we would have said that Laverne was a gay man. Now, I don't really know when she transitioned, so those feelings developed at some point. But post-transition, Laverne as Laverne here, her body and brain have been aligned, but her romantic and sexual attraction haven't changed. So if you are a trans person, those romantic and sexual attractions and feelings don't change. They might, because again, all of this is on a sliding scale. This can all evolve for all of us. But in Laverne's case, it didn't change. So Laverne is considered transgender, but also straight. And I see a comment here from Freddie Silver that says, keep them away from children. And no, Freddie, we're not going to keep transgender people away from children. Trans people are deserving of every single thing that everyone else is deserving of. So not sure why you're here if you're going to try and bring everyone down, but feel free to see yourself out. In any case, Ian is also in the same boat, and he is considered a transgender straight man. So again, Ian's romantic and sexual attraction didn't change when he transitioned, and he is attracted to women. again, pre-transition, we would have said that Ian was a lesbian. And again, it's important to remember that romantic and sexual attraction can ebb and flow over time. So, you know, some of this may change for these people on the screen, for you, for people you know. And, you know, humans love to put labels on everything, but sometimes, remember, labels can be peeled off and changed. So it's also important to remember that some of this can be more fully realized at a later point in your life. I know plenty of people who identified as one way for a very, very long time, you know, until their 40s, 50s, maybe even 60s, and then realized, oh, I've got a, you know, my actual sense of self is a little different in many different ways or one different way. So just something to keep in mind. Now, the final piece of this is on gender expression. And this is perhaps the most fluid of the four concepts on a day-to-day basis. So gender expression is how you present yourself to the world. And there's really no right or wrong way to do it. So you can have fun with gender expression. And personally, I think it's really fun to, if you have this great, strong sense of self, it's fun to have a lot of fun with it sometimes. So gender expression doesn't have to align with your assigned sex, your gender identity, or who you're attracted to. It just doesn't. Sometimes women wear suits, sometimes men paint their nails. It's all on a sliding scale. So with all of that said, it's important to not assume someone's identity based on their gender expression day to day when you meet them. And this is where the pronoun thing comes in. Really, really big time. So if you're unsure how to address someone given their expression, you can always use their name or ask for it. Or you can always politely ask something like, hey, do you mind if I ask your pronouns because I just want to make sure I'm getting things right? And, you know, if you really need to feel like you're not being super awkward about it, you can, you know, just say, I ask pronouns of everyone new when I first meet them to make sure I'm getting it right. We'll dive into this in the Q&A. I've gotten a few questions about it. But you can always just ask. And we'll look at some examples now of celebrities who express themselves in different ways because this might click a little bit more in a second. So again, back to Ellen and TJ here. So we'll start with TJ on the right. His gender expression, we would say, is pretty traditionally masculine. Between his haircut, his clothing, his facial hair, and the complete lack of jewelry, nail polish, makeup, that's all pretty traditionally masculine. And then going to Ellen on the left, her gender expression is also somewhat masculine. She doesn't wear a ton of makeup day to day, she keeps her hair fairly short, and she tends to shy away from things like sundresses and skirts and leans more toward like the pantsuit blazer look. We will also talk about Demi Lovato. So Demi Lovato is a pop music artist who was popular, I think still is popular. I don't know what kids are listening to now, but regardless, Demi Lovato considers themselves both a gender fluid and pansexual. And this is a newer development that hit the news, I don't know, somewhere in the last 6 or 8 months, I think. And the quote that Demi said that was in this one article I read said, I like anything really. I heard someone call the community the alphabet mafia. That's it, that's what I'm going with. So Demi uses they, them pronouns. And again, if they, them is perhaps a little hard for you to process at first, you could always just call them Demi, because that's their name. So the final one, and this is an interesting one, is Prince. So Prince is someone who's been quite the interesting character over the years and has shown up as all sorts of different personas here. Prince never really confirmed his sexual orientation publicly, but it appears that his gender identity was never much in question, at least outwardly to the media and to fans and things like that. Prince identified as male and used he, him pronouns, or at least never corrected anyone otherwise, but he also played around a lot with gender expression. So if you look at these 3 pictures here, these are from different periods of his music career. He combined some really traditionally masculine expressions like facial hair and suit jackets with some really traditionally feminine elements like lipstick, glitter, and heels. So again, this is all on this sliding scale, and Prince, I think in particular, did a really nice job embodying that and, showing that off to the world for the sake of just, what are you feeling like today? What are you feeling like for this performance, for this, outing that you've got? So don't be afraid to have a little fun with it. So we're going to go into the pronoun thing a little bit more. And I say the pronoun thing because that's what a few friends have actually called it when they've been asking me about it over the last couple years. And not everyone really understands this concept of why we would use them, in conversation or introductions.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, my watch is listening to me. So I've heard from some people that they've been asked, or someone they know have been asked, to share their pronouns when going around a circle of all new people. Whether that's at a business meeting or college, like get to know your dorm mates. They've been asked to say, say your name and say your pronouns. And some of these activities can feel a little bit forced. And they can really feel forced if you're a cisgender person who your gender expression is also very traditionally masculine or feminine, and you've just kind of gone through your life for however many years with no one questioning any of that. But it's also important that understand no one wants to be misgendered. For those of us who are male on the stream here, I don't know if you remember, as a young kid, kind of before your voice dropped, if you'd answer the phone and whoever was calling thought that you were your mom, that's a great example of misgendering. And you really don't want to do that with your adult friends and colleagues. So we'll talk about this more here for a second. So mistakes happen, obviously, but if you meet someone whose gender expression is unclear and you can't suss it out from the person's name, you can ask. You get certain names in particular that are not always clear, especially if there's not a very clear gender expression going on that day. So think of, Pat, Sam, names like that could kind of go either way. You can just ask, hey, do you mind if I ask your pronouns? I want to make sure I'm not misgendering you. I ask this of everyone new I meet just so that we're on the same page. Something like that is a great way to phrase it, and truly, no one should be bothered by that. Speaking of misgendering, we're going to talk a little bit more about it, and there's also this concept of dead naming transgender people. So these two things are really, really important, and we're going to put a really fine point on it right now. So this is someone who's been in and out of the news over the past few years, and also in more recent months. This is Caitlyn Jenner. Now, Caitlyn is someone who is kind of controversial, especially among the LGBT community, and a lot of folks within the community don't necessarily like her stance on our own rights or other political topics. But Caitlyn is a transgender woman. Her pronouns are she, her, and hers, and no matter how much some of us may despise her, none of us should dead name her or misgender her. Her name is Caitlyn, she is a woman, and that is that. So misgendering would be referring to Caitlyn as a male, and then dead naming would be the idea of using Caitlyn's old name that she had pre-transition. So it is considered inappropriate and rude to ask someone's dead name. So if you're becoming friends with a trans person and maybe you don't have a lot of trans friends to start, let them volunteer that sort of information if they even feel comfortable with it. And let them volunteer any other sort of information about their actual transition process. Don't ask about it. I've been in situations where someone has asked, and they were probably, well-meaning, but it was so cringy in the moment. So you may have some questions, you may have some curiosities, but we have Google, we have Bing, we have DuckDuckGo, and those are all really, really great ways to educate yourself. So you can type a lot of things in there and you will get some really good answers. Those places are your friend first. It's really not up to your one trans friend to be the sole source of educating you on everything. If you do end up becoming very close, you can ask permission to ask some questions, but be ready for them to perhaps not want to answer them either. So if they do give you permission to ask those questions, that is different. So again, with Caitlyn Jenner in particular, this is a great example of, not dead naming, not misgendering. Caitlyn is a great, we all kind of followed that transition process. And if you are a decent human, you will not refer to Caitlyn Jenner as anything other than Caitlyn Jenner, even if you cannot stand her. So that's that. All right. So that is what I have for the sake of presenting and talking at people. Again, we had this Q&A, and I encourage you, if you still have questions, throw them in. It is the link to the Google form. We've got some questions in here, so I'm going to read them out and answer them to the best of my ability. And it's important to note, I am but one cisgender, white, gay man. My experiences are still, only those. I can share experiences that I know of certain friends and colleagues, but you may ask these same questions to another person in the community and get a totally different answer. And in a lot of cases, it's kind of a go with your gut, go with what feels right, but educate yourself and see kind of where multiple people say things along the same lines and the same theme. All right, so first one. I'm a nurse and I see all kinds of patients, including trans patients, in a regular community clinic. How do I make my patient comfortable in the front lobby, and how do I address the appropriate pronoun without offending? I'm all for educating myself rather than making assumptions. So that is a great question, and like I said, especially in a clinic, healthcare sort of environment, I think it's totally appropriate to start off by saying, this is something that we ask of everyone to make sure that you have the best healthcare experience possible here in this clinic. Do you have, what are your preferred pronouns? What are your pronouns? And I would even hesitate to use the word preferred, because they're not really preferred, they're just the person's pronouns. But just say that it is something you ask everyone, even if it necessarily isn't, and go from there. Next one. What kind of questions, research, or conversation topics would be most helpful to discuss with my under 12-year-old child who believes they are non-binary? Truly, I think you could run through the concept of the gender-bred person. I don't think that is super hard to understand. I think you can go as deep or stay as on the surface as you want based on your particular child. When you say that your child believes they're non-binary, I think it's also really important to reinforce with kids that humans, as humans, like to label things, and if you think you're something, that's really awesome, and you should embrace that. And remember that saying that you're it at age like 11, those feelings may continue to develop, or they may change a little bit. It's kind of like, the waves in the ocean, they come and go. So just reinforce the notion with them that that's really great. We totally love and respect you, and if this continues to feel this way, awesome. If you start to feel differently, also awesome. Let's see here. Another one about a child. They didn't mention age. I have a friend whose daughter is questioning her identity/sexuality. We were speaking about this and were wondering why it is that it seems like all the young kids, elementary and teenagers, seem to be non-binary. Is it a fad? And her and I are confused about the pronoun thing. So you'll see the pronoun thing is not something I was just making up. People do say it that way. Okay, a couple things to break down with this one. Why does non-binary seem to be more prevalent among the younger crowd? I think the best answer to that, and this is someone who, I'm someone who doesn't have kids and am not really plugged into that age group, but I would guess that as society becomes a little more progressive and understands the notion of being not straight in different ways and not cisgender in different ways, and kind of all these things we've talked about, I think kids in particular, they're like sponges, and they pick up on a lot of this. And if they see people like Demi Lovato saying, oh, I'm non-binary and I'm pansexual, and the kids want to learn what that means, and if they're having feelings that aren't totally sorted out yet, putting non-binary on it is a great label to say, I kind of don't know right now, I might, things might feel this way forever, things might change, and that's that. So when I came out to my parents, I first came out as bisexual because I didn't want to really commit to something that I wasn't 100% sure I felt. And I think if I were in the same boat now, being the age I was then, I think society as a whole has these other terms that have become more prevalent that maybe I could have expressed a little bit better how I was feeling versus saying something that was potentially a bit confusing at the time. So no, I don't think it's a fad. I think it's just the prevalence of different terms getting more popular in truly places like pop culture where people will hear them. Okay, next one. My husband and I had a debate on how to address the pronoun thing, again used here, in the professional world. I said we now have to ask how would you like to be addressed, even if a person appears to be the same sex. I think the implication here is they appear to be expressing themselves the same sex that you would assume based on their name and other characteristics. This seems very difficult to handle in a business and professional world. How should it be addressed? One thing that you can do tonight, tomorrow, that is free, open up Outlook and change your email signature. Have your name and then put the pronouns that you use in a small little font under your name. It is free. It takes under 30 seconds to do, and it will go a long way in just telling other people that you work with that you understand what's going on, and that if they are someone who perhaps presents as a little more non-binary or whatever, that you're hip to all this. The other thing, again, like I said with the person who's working at a clinic and in healthcare, if you meet someone new, just make it up, just improvise and say, hey, every time I meet someone new, I just make sure to ask their pronouns so I know we're starting on the same page and starting on the right foot. It really doesn't take any more than that. And again, it's not something that you have to say every single time, but you can certainly try it, or you can just say that that's something that you ask. All right, this next one was a pretty long one, and I will just summarize it from what I pulled out of this. So this person who wrote in is someone who claims to be an ally, and I believe someone who is cisgender. And they were signing up at a new gym to have a personal trainer. And it says, I was seeking a competent trainer familiar with the gym equipment. And they were having kind of that first phone call, I guess, or meeting before they got started with their workout plan. And it appears that the trainer introduced themselves and said their pronouns to this new client when they introduced themselves. And the client responded, well, I don't need to know your pronouns. I don't need to get into that. I'm just here to work out. And the trainer responded again and said, well, fine, but these are my pronouns. Kind of take it or leave it. And the comment here was that I only wanted a trainer. How can trans people best avoid being triggered and bullied without triggering and bullying others? No one deserves abuse. So this is an interesting one because if I'm interpreting this question right, the client who wrote the question had no desire to hear the pronouns of the trainer as just a brief introduction. And without knowing who the trainer is and how their gender expression is day to day or in that training environment, it's kind of hard to say. But regardless, if someone is vulnerable enough to introduce themselves to you and share their pronouns with you, the absolute rudest thing you can do is tell them you don't want to hear it. So truly, if you find hearing someone's pronouns to be a form of bullying, you may not want to enter businesses that consider themselves fairly progressive, because that's on you to learn how to accept, truly. It's not on the person sharing their pronouns to cater to you. Next one up, my nephew's pronouns are he/they, and I don't understand why the they. So this person is saying that their nephew has said my pronouns that I want to use are he and they understand the he because the nephew, I'm assuming, presents as male, between name, identity, expression, all that good stuff. and they don't understand the they. I think the they in this case is probably just kind of, again, leaving that door open, not understanding the age here. Age was not mentioned, but I think it's, again, like we were talking about with these, elementary and middle school age kids, leaving the door open for just a little more alphabet soup down the road, or even day to day, however they're feeling, is totally fine. That's just all they're doing. Next one. I have been scolded by a handful of allies for using the ally flag and told I'm not respecting the community by doing so. When I asked my kid, who they say is part of the LGBT plus community, if it bothered them, they said not at all. Who cares what others think? There's no right answer. I asked a friend of mine and his husband. They said they love seeing it. So am I being disrespectful? I'm getting really mixed messages. This goes back to the thing I said at the start of this, where you do what's right for you. And if you're trying to be an ally and you're trying to show your support for a community that is often marginalized, often not fully understood, take the criticism and feedback and, process it and put it somewhere and, rock on with yourself. Like, keep doing your thing. No one will ever tell you that they are bothered by a show of support. At least no one that I know in my close network and my expanded network. Okay. I don't even know how to frame this question without sounding offensive. What if someone, a stranger, appears as if they may be non-binary? I feel as though asking their pronouns is presumptuous and possibly offensive. What should I do? This goes with kind of everything else that we've covered already, which is just, if you're newer to meeting them, just slide it into conversation, and you can even, make it about you. Don't make it about them. Say, hey, I'm really trying to be a better ally. I'm trying to learn more about, all these different ways people identify, and I'm trying to understand how all of my colleagues, the people in my orbit, identify. So can you help me? Can you just tell me what your pronouns are? So, if it's not awkward if you make it about yourself and make yourself, it means you have to be vulnerable, but it's okay to be vulnerable. So, okay, that is that. Next one. When meeting someone who may not use cisgender pronouns or identify that way, what is the most appropriate way to ask what that person's preference is? Same thing. Make it about you, be a little vulnerable, and then let them, open the door here. Is it seen as offensive or exclusive to just say LGBT instead of the longer acronym? Not at all. If you want to come across as perhaps a little more progressive or inclusive, you could add the Q, you could add a plus sign. Truly, I always, most of the time, end up just typing or writing LGBT because it's alphabet soup, and it can be quite a lot to type, say, spell, talk about. Everyone knows it's all a big rainbow umbrella. Let's see. What is something that cis people do that is crude or offensive to the LGBT community but they don't realize? Eat at ChickfilA. I'll start with that because that's a personal thing that really bugs me. Do some reading on ChickfilA. They did a lot of bad things to the queer community many, many years ago. They apologized and said they weren't doing it, and now they're still donating money to people who don't really want to, let us have rights, but they're doing it kind of through backdoor ways, with what their CEO is doing. So the easiest thing you can do, truly, in a great sense, is stop eating at ChickfilA. Your friend's rights are more important than a chicken sandwich that's kind of not that good in the first place. As far as other things that you can do that are considered kind of, crude or offensive, I would really just say, consider the fact that everyone's got a story that is different from yours, and that if someone is trying to be vulnerable with you, let them be vulnerable, maybe be a little vulnerable in return. And I would honestly love for more of my straight friends, my cisgender friends, to ask questions. On the one hand, I will totally say, I am not here to educate you. You know, if you want to call yourself an ally, you can go educate yourself. Like I said, Google and Bing and DuckDuckGo, great resources. However, if you see something in the news and it's about this community in some way and you're curious about it or you have a thought about it, you know, especially if it's something negative, like, you know, think a few years ago about the Pulse nightclub shootings, how awful those were. You know, the entire queer community felt that and was hurting from that, and I would have loved for more of my straight friends to say something. Not necessarily to say, I understand how you feel, but just to say, like, I see the news that's about your community, I understand it's impacting you, I'm here for you, I have this feeling about it, I have this thought about it. And even things that aren't painful and hurtful, even the positive, you know, bring it up sometimes. That's a really good thing. And I see Zach chimed in the chat here. I think this is probably about Chick-fil-A, but also in general, support local businesses. We all have our big name favorite businesses. However, support the people who support you. And if you know, and this goes outside the LGBT community, but if you know businesses that are owned by friends, black people, other people of color, women, queer people, support them. You know, they need all the support they can get. In the particular case of the Washington, D.C. area, and I talk about Chick-fil-A because it's just such an easy example, there is a place in Alexandria, Virginia called Stomping Ground, and they are very LGBT friendly. They make an excellent chicken biscuit, and I would go there 4 times over and tip them excessively before I went somewhere else. So that is another great thing you can do. Let's see here. My 2.5-year-old foster child has prepubescent puberty. What is the cure for this? I'm afraid I am not the person to ask for that, and I don't think anyone in the chat necessarily is either. I would talk to a doctor about that. However, to add something from my perspective, you can go on Google, you can go on Google Maps, and you can look for queer-friendly, LGBT-friendly doctors. If you've noticed some businesses on Google Maps, they have a little rainbow that says LGBT-friendly when you see them in the search results. That is a great way to, you know, find a doctor's office among other businesses that is, you know, well-versed and educated in basically everything we've talked about tonight. So I don't really know what to tell you there, but absolutely seek out a doctor that understands, you know, all of the alphabet soup of the queer community, plus just general, you know, pediatrics and childhood growth sort of things. Okay, I struggle to understand and empathize with some of the more, quote, off-the-wall letters in the acronym, such as people that claim to identify as an inanimate object or are attracted to animals and such. How to identify where to draw the line but not be closed-minded? This is not a question that I want to make fun of, and I don't want people in the chat to make fun of it either, because I think this is an important thing to talk about. So, you know, first of all, we've seen, and you see this in the car community in particular, where people say, you know, my truck identifies as a Prius. And really, y'all, we need to stop making identify as jokes, because all that does is it invalidates the entire transgender community and everything they've fought for from way, way back to today. So if you are a person who has made those jokes in the past, please don't do it anymore. If you are a person who hasn't made those jokes but you see them, squash them. This is a part of being an active advocate and not a passive ally. When you see crappy comments, you need to be the one that steps up and says something, because if I say it, I'm the angry gay man. If you say it and you're the straight ally and you're just somebody, suddenly you're just someone who's doing what's right. So when we're talking about letters in the LGBTQIA+ acronym, none of those letters, and that is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, pansexual, and onward, none of that really has anyone saying that they identify as an inanimate object None of that has anyone saying they're attracted to animals or other inanimate objects. Those are just things that, maybe someone says as a joke, but truly, I know a lot of people in the LGBT/queer community, and not one has ever told me that they identify as an inanimate object or is attracted to, someone that's not another human. There is a whole separate conversation we can get into about kink, but that is not for this time and this place. But maybe some of that stems from people who are more into that world. But as far as where to draw the line but not be closed-minded, when people tell you who they are, again, when they tell you that they're vulnerable, just roll with it and thank them and lean into it and be a little vulnerable yourself. If someone tells you that they identify as an inanimate object, again, I don't know, lean into it, be a little vulnerable, ask them a question and say, hey, do you mind if I ask you a little bit more about that? That's really fascinating. You don't have to necessarily understand any of this that we talked about tonight, but you can certainly try to embrace it and learn a little bit more about it. And again, all you have to do is say, hey, do you mind if I ask you a little bit more about this, because I just don't understand. I have a trans coworker who is out of our Denver office, and she is a lovely woman. We had a great time at Pride a few years ago in New York City, and she and I connected very quickly, and through the series of conversations we had over a couple days, I got to the point where I said, hey, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? Because I have things on my mind, and I said, you don't have to say yes. And she did say yes, and she said, yeah, I have no problem, I'm very open. And we had a really interesting conversation, and she was very vulnerable to me and very matter of fact, and it was so great. But I didn't require her to be that way. So, again, just if you have a question, you can always ask it, but be prepared that someone may not want to answer or not answer all the way. All right, so that's all I've got for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us, joining me, and taking the time to educate yourselves that much more. I hope this was helpful in some way or many ways. As a reminder, you can show your support not only by subscribing to the channel right here if you are an automotive person and want to see more of our content, but also by donating to the Trevor Project at that link in the description here at the bottom of the stream. So that is that. Next time you're driving, I have to say it because we're an automotive channel, please stay safe and be well on the road. Keep your eyes up and out of your phone. And we would love to see you on our website, on Facebook and Instagram, here on Facebook, and perhaps at the racetrack if you're not coming already. So with all that, I'm going to sign off. It is my bedtime because I was up very early buying a car going to Philly this morning. So I'm out of here. Thank you all very much, and good night.